This edition of PSR Talks is brought to you again by New Tripoli Bank, because people are more valuable than money. And boy, I tell you, that is a statement that is no more true now than it's ever been. A few months back, with everything going on in the Lehigh Valley, we were wondering, how schools were going to look. And of course, because we cover sports, how high school sports would look. And we felt it was important to talk about what the students and coaches in the world of high school sports were doing to prepare for a season that might have or might not happen. And in the fall, certainly we got through quite a lot of sports. We also thought it was critical to have a discussion about the effects of the lockdown on families that were having to deal with homeschooling and separation of the children from their schoolmates and everything else that has been a factor since COVID has hit. And back then, we talked to Dr. Jilda Hodges, who is back again with us today on PSR Talks. It is now a few months into the school year, and we are hitting the Christmas vacation as we talk now. And again, Dr. Hodges, if you weren't with us in the last interview, an assistant director at the Lehigh Psychological Services and is also a Pennsylvania certified child psychologist. Doctor, thank you for joining us. It's been an interesting few months in the world of schooling to begin with, and then certainly with high school sports. As we mentioned, fall sports happen. A lot of games were executed. Most were, a great majority of them. I think there were two camps of people: those who thought it was important that there was in-person schooling and that was perfectly fine, and those who felt like the at-home schooling online was the way to go to try and keep the children safe. They felt it was too big a risk to have them in school with other students, exposing them to the virus. From your experience in the past few months, what's been the response of students who've been able to get back to the classroom and get back to athletic competition even? Do they appear to be handling the COVID crisis better than those who continue to do remote learning and have less exposure to their fellow students?
You know what? I think it's a really tricky question, but what I will say is, in general, most of the kids that I've seen and parents with whom I've spoken, they are very happy to have their kids in school. They see the positives of their child being able to actually interact with their teacher face-to-face, interact with their classmates face-to-face, access all the things that you have to access in school. It looks different. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend. It looks different. But by and large, kids are happy to be in school. You will have older kids who would say they prefer to be in school. In terms of athletes, their athletes and their parents were thrilled to be able to see those seasons happen. And again, like everything else, that looked different too, but they were really happy about it. I mean, any child, adolescent who was able to engage in their usual activity was definitely happy, partly because that's part of their identity and those are their interests. Sure. But the other part of it is that stress relief too. I mean, even if you don't consciously think about it, it's a stress reliever. You get to be away from your house longer. You get to be away from your family longer. And there are plenty of people who do very well virtually, but a lot of that falls on the schools and a lot of that falls on the parents. There are certainly, as you said, a fair number of people who just feel like it's not a good idea to have their child actually in school, and they can make things work. And I think I've seen a lot of people do a really great job of setting up basically like a home office for their
Sure.
child.
Sure.
So, but I mean, I think by and large, kids who've been able to get out and engage in their usual activities, they are happy. And kids who are in school, they are happy too. I think they're a lot happier than when they have to do the digital learning, when, we see all that flip-flopping happening.
Now, certainly we talked last time about a lot of kids who are already struggling with the lockdown that had been in place since March, going over through the summer. You and I talked beginning of September as school is about to start or just starting. As time has gone on and now the holidays have kicked in, we've had Thanksgiving, we're about to have Christmas. They continue to deal with missing friends and now missing family, of course, during the holidays. We spoke about the resiliency of children last time, but I have to wonder if there's a point where kids will be severely affected and how that will manifest itself outwardly. Is it cyclical for kids as it may be for adults, where they find they're fine for a while, but then they struggle, and then maybe they come back and learn how to deal with it better, but then struggle again? Do they have that same kind of issue that maybe a lot of adults have with dealing with it, but then struggling at times?
You know what? Yes. I think that's partly human nature. And we talked before too about kids really observing how their parents are handling things. So as our stress level goes up and our frustrations mount, kids are going to read into that too. And they also have their own sets of frustrations that they're going to bring into things. So even if we try to put on the most positive attitude that we can, and essentially like, all right, we're going to put on that happy face, kids may or may not be able to do that.
Yeah.
And you try to find good things. Like honestly, it's something that I live every day too, having kids. And
Sure.
I do try to find those positives, but I see it too. We're doing great. Then we're feeling frustrated about this. We're doing great. Now I'm saying, hey, you know what? I think we need to take a break from some activities. Now we're getting angry again. Like it's completely normal. Like that's actually, to me, I say this to people all the time. I would rather see that range of emotion than to see nothing or to see a full-on withdrawal. When
Sure.
I'm seeing kids just numb and withdrawn, adults too, anybody, those things scare me more than the person who's angry, the person who's sad, the person who's frustrated.
Let me hit on that point. Let me follow up with another question. You talk about being withdrawn, and I feel like for kids, it seems to be a lot easier for them to be able to do that, to be able to just cocoon themselves, go silent, kind of just ignore what's going on around them, and I'm wondering if at times maybe parents might not see this happening. I'm sure a lot of them have recognized it, but I wonder if some parents think their kid is dealing with it okay, but really what they're doing is they're withdrawing and they're trying to just block everything out so that they don't feel the emotion that, legitimately they should feel at this point.
That's actually a very good point. And sometimes, especially our teenagers, when they want to retreat off and do, even if we're saying, all right, you can go do your thing and you can have your FaceTime with your friends, and we assume that kind of thing is happening, and it very much may not be. We can miss those things. It's important to check in with your kids, and you can ask them. You can ask details. Oh, nice. Who are you talking to tonight? To try to get in there a little bit more. It's okay to ask the questions. It's okay to ask the tough questions too. I know
Sure.
it's not fun and it's not always easy, and it's definitely not comfortable, but it's okay to ask those things. It's actually a good idea to ask those things if you're wondering. It's so healthy. So that's one way of really checking on that. Are you doing what you're saying you're doing? If your kids have social media, it's a really good idea to check on that too, because sometimes what they're telling their family and their friends, they project a completely different image out there on social media, and that's concerning too.
Sure.
So, yeah.
We spoke last time about an article that was in the Morning Call, quoting a University of Wisconsin study from March to May last year, of this year. It seems like last year. That it showed school closings and sports cancellations were leading to about 2/3 of student athletes experiencing depressions and about 65% experiencing anxiety. We also spoke about some things for parents to look for in their kids with what's going on with them. In your observations, again, to this point, how well have parents been able to see these signs and help their kids deal with all the difficulties that they are trying to get through during this lockdown?
Parents have done a surprisingly good job. They really are picking up on things. And sometimes, you know, when we're saying about anxiety and depression, perhaps it's clinically and diagnostically accurate. Sometimes it can be more depressed feelings or symptoms and more anxious feelings and symptoms that don't necessarily meet the clinical criteria, but it's a change nonetheless. Parents often pick up on that. And there's definitely been a fair number of parents who will pick up the phone, or you get kids who are late high school who will make that call themselves and say, all right, you know what, I'm definitely looking for some services. This is definitely getting really hard for me. I think it has been very impressive. A lot of times as parents, you think you're missing things. You don't know what's going on. And like I think I mentioned this before too. If you're not sure, call, reach out, ask someone. Sometimes it's nice to get that reassurance that what's happening is normal. And maybe you check in once or twice and you realize, you know what? Things have improved. I've definitely seen that where the call gets made and a few weeks later, things are looking better. We had a rough patch. We struggled. Parents saw it. Kids saw it. And it started to level out. So good job, parents. I think we all really question ourselves, but by and large, parents are doing a great job.
Now, moving on to some other thoughts here, we've seen some schools who certainly have done a good job in trying to get online learning and even a hybrid of online and at home learning accomplished. You've seen, have you seen any kind of difference between students who are going to the classroom, going to the brick and mortar school every day, and then maybe those who are home all the time, or even those who are a bit of a hybrid? I think everyone has an opinion on this because certainly it's been a parental discussion that's gone on since school started up again. Do you see any difference with how these kids are dealing with COVID, depending on whether they're home all the time or at school at least part of the time?
Generally speaking, most kids seem to be happy when they can get to school. And that's been across the board with various ages. I think honestly, where the problems arise is when there's a constant change in how education is being delivered. And that's been something that's been happening recently because of concerns with travel at Thanksgiving, travel that might happen with Christmas and New Year's. We're seeing schools that had a plan in place and they would do this combination of, they do their hybrid and they had a solid plan. Now all of a sudden we're going to be virtual. Now we're back to hybrid. Now we're back to virtual. I think that is a huge hurdle for students. I think that's a huge hurdle for teachers. And I think that's a huge hurdle for parents to constantly have to adjust, adjusting work schedules, adjusting learning plans, adjusting literally everything. I mean, if you've gone from fully in person to fully remote, that's huge. I mean, and then for our hybrid kids, you take out that possibility of going into the classroom. It's so much like each week to just have to wrap our heads around that. And that's been the one thing I've really tried to be supportive of with every person with whom I speak, because it's a lot. It's a lot on kids and parents and teachers. And that's where I think the breakdown happens, honestly. If we can come up with a plan and we can stick with that plan long term, kids can do very well. I've seen kids do a great job. Like I said before, they establish that workspace. They've got this all set up. Everyone's feeling really good. You're in your routine and now, boop, routine's totally changed.
Sure.
So, but I know most kids have been happy. They really have been happy to be able to go to school, to be able to see their friends. Even though recess doesn't look like your typical recess and lunch, you're still there with your friends. You're just, there's a big gap between you and the next person, but you can still socialize. You can still talk. We can't do that on those days when we're virtual. We can do it like this, but the younger the kids, the less chance they have to interact with their friends. So our older kids, they can still make it work. Some schools are extremely strict about it. I've
Yeah.
heard lots of stories from lots of schools. So the ones that completely limit that interaction, that's where kids are less happy. I mean, I've actually had some kids say, I wanted to go back so bad, but I'm never allowed to talk to my friends. And I just kind of wish I was virtual.
Yeah.
So when it's that rigid, we can make socialization happen and still meet all the requirements with distancing and wearing masks and everything that needs to happen in school.
Right. Now, without question, the family unit certainly had to make a lot of adjustments through all this with all the homeschooling that has to go on. And if there are multiple kids in a family, that's a lot of responsibility for the parents. We talk about the effects of this on children, but the stories that I'm hearing from parents at home are, somewhat horror stories about trying to balance doing their work at home, because many of us have to work at home and are able to, and still be able to keep an eye out on their child for their school learning at home. Because, again, I'm hearing a lot of stories where it's a struggle. I'm hearing it from parents and from teachers to get the full attention of the students all the time. And sometimes parents need to really sit with their kids during the school day, and it's taken a big toll on a lot of parents. What are you seeing as far as what parents are telling you, how they're able to deal with it? Because certainly we could talk about the kids all day and how it affects them, but it's certainly affecting the parents and what they're able to do as a parent to help them through all this.
You know what? That is an incredible struggle. And certainly when you have younger kids, certainly if you have kids who are needier, they might have learning issues, they might have attention issues, they might have other areas where they're struggling and really need that support. So all of a sudden, that work from home day, it doesn't look the way that any of us are going to envision it. It's not as simple as, I'm going to sit here and do my work from 8:30 to 3:30 while the kids are doing their work from 8:30 to 3:30. It doesn't happen that way. It really doesn't. And sometimes it can be something that seems so simple. Like I have had parents say, it's all about the technology. Their kids do fine with the school components and they're doing their work, but every time you have to switch something up, like they constantly need to be there to pull something up for their kids or switch to a different Zoom call. I mean, but then you have this other group where literally I have parents who have to sit there with their child or that
Right.
is not paying attention. There's no way he's checked in. And virtual learning doesn't necessarily play to the strengths of most people. I mean, how many people want to sit in front of a computer all day? So
Yeah. I think it's a struggle for the teachers who are not used to teaching that way. And speaking as a student, as we all have been, there are moments in your school day where you just want to hide behind another kid for a few minutes because to keep that eye contact constant is tough to do during a school day. Now they have a teacher who can see every child's face all day long, and I got to believe it's some pressure on the student to always be attentive, and that's tough to do for a full school day.
it really is. I mean, I try to problem solve with people too. Like, are there ways we can take breaks? I mean, when you have that shift between classes, I'm like, get up, move around, get a drink, walk around. You have to get up out of your seat. And I would say that to parents too. I mean, when you're sitting there, you're in meetings all day. Like, listen, do you have a little break in between? I mean, we all need it. I think it gets really interesting. And I had the chance to observe this when I had, my kids were virtual briefly, and how teachers even manage the group of kids that are in the classroom and the group of kids who are zooming in.
Yep.
It's fascinating to me. It really is. And I think there's going to be times where it's going to take away from some of the learning. And I think everyone's doing the best that they can. And I think parents are doing the best that they can.
Sure.
What I would say to parents too, especially if there are certain times in your day that are really difficult, or certain classes where it's really difficult for your child, I would talk with the teacher and maybe you problem solve something together. Maybe it's a case of, I know they're supposed to submit the assignment right now. Could we have until the end of the day? Maybe we can work on this at another time when
Sure.
they're more checked in. And most teachers are very open to that. So
Right.
communication,
Yeah.
it's all about that communication. And that buys you some life too. And it's okay to be honest and say, I'm working. I truly ran into that. And I just had to tell the teacher, I'm like, I'm really sorry, but my kid missed your class today because I didn't get the link in time, and I'm working now, and we did our best.
Right.
So be honest.
Let's move on to another topic, and something that we heard a lot early on in this COVID situation was how people had to change to what was being called the new normal. People certainly have learned to adapt through all of this, and we spoke about the ability of children to adapt. The younger that they are better off in adapting into these things. We also talked about the older student, perhaps high school age, who might find it a little tougher to make those kinds of changes than any other student. How well do you think all kids have been able to do with adapting to a way of life that probably won't change too much well into until maybe the second half of 2021? How do you feel like kids are going to be able to deal with this going on for at least another 6 months?
You know what? I think, again, a lot of it is in how we handle it ourselves as parents. It's not fun. And honestly, like, I have to take a deep breath when you say like another 6 months. It's like, okay, it's another 6 months. And that's like my first, I was like, okay, it's another 6 months. But then I'm going, it's 6 months, which in the life of a 6-year-old, that's a pretty big chunk of time. In the life of a 40-year-old, that's really like, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
That's what I try to remember. Like, we made it this far. We can see a light at the end of the tunnel. Things are going to get better again. And I still try to think of all the things that you can do, because there are a lot of things. And I'm like holding out hope that we can find a way to, bring back sports, find some way to get these kids back out of the house. I mean, I don't love that for the first 2 to 4 weeks I'm hearing in various schools that they're going to be all virtual. But then I'm going, okay, well, it's 2 to 4 weeks. And then we're going to try to get back there and do, either hybrid or in-person learning. So that's a positive, like moving in that direction and getting creative.
Right.
Getting creative in how you can connect with people. And I've had to think outside of the box. So it takes a little bit more time, especially with the holidays coming up.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be with other people. We're trying to find ways to keep it fun and make like a new tradition here. And, we're going to go drop off presents at people's houses. So we can still say like a hi, Merry Christmas. It'll be a little bit distant, but you know what? My kids can still see their cousins. They can still see their aunts and uncles.
Sure.
Trying to find those ways to still keep that connection, because that's what I think, honestly, that's where I think people struggle more. I mean, most kids don't really care that much about if they can go shopping without a mask. There's that part of it, but it's like, okay, whatever, we can all deal with that. But it's missing the family, it's missing friends. So finding the way to get past it. And then honestly, if we really sit back and think about what January looks like anyway, in some ways I was going, maybe the snow wasn't so bad this last week.
Yeah.
It like forced everybody to be home. It forced people to go out and just accept, here's a snow day. What do you do? What do you do on a snow day? You sleep in, you go play in the snow, you kick back.
Mm-hmm.
Finding all that. And then really, like, what does January bring? The holidays are all over and it's just nose to the grind. So trying to see things for what they are. I think we forget that because it's like January of 2019, 2020. It was like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Like, really, it feels, when you really think back, I mean, even March, it feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
But try to put that in perspective for yourselves and for your kids. It's going to be cold. January is cold.
Yeah.
We're going to hope for sports. We're going to hope for ways to get our kids out. We're going to hope that we're getting back into the classroom. So it really can be nose to the grind like it is every other January.
And now let's turn a little bit and talk about high school sports. As we mentioned in the beginning of this interview, fall sports took place. Most of the football games, there have been a couple of tabulations done by some of our good friends out in the Pennsylvania high school sports world, where a good 90 to 95% of the games were played. Even the ones that were postponed were played. Some big games towards the end of the season were missed, but for the most part, they got back and played football and soccer and field hockey and cross country happened as well. How much of a benefit do you feel these kids, these student athletes, received in being able to get back out there and compete with other student athletes?
I think it was huge. I mean, when you are doing this sport for a while, you love it. It's something that you're passionate about. It's something you enjoy. It's always going to have a positive effect. It is. I think there's that trickle down effect for parents too. I mean, I'm thinking back through that season, how many of those athletes were seniors? How many of them get to say, I got to have a senior season? I hope that all of our athletes will have that opportunity for so many reasons. But parents like that closure too. I mean, you might be moving on and playing sports in college. You might not. This might be it now for you. You're moving on to something completely different. And there's just so many positives, not the least of which is I get to do something that I enjoy. I get to do something that I look forward to. How many people can't say that? I mean, I think that's the challenging part. Looking at the winter sports season, now we've got those kids that are going to be sitting here wondering, and these parents who are sitting here wondering, is there going to be a season? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's really scary. So the fact that we were able to get through that fall season, it's amazing. And there are so many parents who were overjoyed that they could see their kids through that season too. Even if they couldn't be there at every game.
Right.
Then that looked different, but your kids are out there doing what they enjoy. So that feels good.
Yeah. And we're hoping that after this mandate from the governor to hold off sports until after January 4th, that we certainly get back to this. And, I keep wondering about what in the long term this is going to do to a lot of our students. Have we given enough thought as a society about the long-term effects that this could be for the students? Are people putting so much emphasis on the immediate belief that they're protecting their kids from COVID that they are sacrificing how much of this might change their life and might affect their kids' future? Are we putting enough thought into that, or is the immediate desire to keep your children safe from a virus maybe disabling some people from really looking at the long-term effects of what we're doing to try to avoid COVID?
I think the complicated part is that we don't know enough about what long-term effects might be out there. And for so many things we can pull on this nice broad area of research, but in our lifetimes, we've never experienced something like this. We've never gone through this. And so it's really difficult to know. I try to look at the potential positives. I hear so many people saying negative things about teenagers, and there's so many negative descriptions out there, but I'm looking at the generation that's coming up through this right now. And I think it can actually build some resiliency. I mean, they are facing something that's really, really difficult that we as adults are facing along with them. When they're faced with these difficult problems later in life, they are going to have this to pull from. And it's not going to be a case of, well, I lived through COVID, so I can do, everything else is cake. I mean, it's not as simple as that. But understanding what it feels like to go through a hard time, understanding loss, because whether we want to hear it or not, there is still a sense of loss and grief here on a lot of different levels. So our kids are learning how to deal with these kinds of struggles. And we have that potential to, build that resiliency and build strength. There is always going to be, I think, that lingering question of what are the potential outcomes? And there are certainly going to be some negative potential outcomes. I mean, there's no one thing that's going to capture every group of kids, but we certainly have kids who I would say are, they would be considered an at-risk population, whether that is because of where they live, an urban environment, or parents aren't around, or they're in foster care. There's so many potential areas. Kids who are at risk for abuse or have been abused or neglected, and this is like a hotbed for it. I mean, those are the things that have many people concerned, and it's really hard to find those. So you mean those I think are the kids that we do worry about more. When sports gets them away,
Right.
and they don't have to be around this, they can find a better path for themselves. I mean, there are so many stories of athletes who came up through the trenches and they made those choices. We're taking that from those kids.
Right. Yeah, finally, as we wrap up and close out this interview with Dr. Jilda Hodges, kind enough to join us again for a second time here on PSR Talks. We tried to address this last time, some of the things that parents might want to do to deal with the coming school year and multiple months of living in close quarters with family on a day-to-day basis. Again, I think people have adapted as much as they can to this point, but have done so with the idea that, this will get back to some sort of normalcy, quote unquote, at some point. If someone comes to you and says, look, I know I have to keep living this way for some time, and as an adult, I'm prepared to do what I need to do. I get that I have to do it, but I'm concerned about how long our kids are going to be able to live like this. What do you tell parents in a case like this? What can they do to help their children throughout this situation? Perhaps another, as we mentioned, another 6, who knows, 6 to 12 months it could be. I hate to say that, sorry.
I know. That's okay.
And it could be another 6, another 12 months. We could be right back here next year, still trying to wrap it up. What do you tell parents who might have to go through this for a while? That they're going to have their way of life affected, and their kids are going to be affected for a long period of time. What do you tell them to try to keep doing what they're doing, or do you give them advice about trying to adjust things as time goes on? How do parents need to think about this as they move forward for another 6 months or so?
I mean, it's going to come back to communication. I mean, that's huge. So we watch our kids and see, and they're going to ask you questions, and be honest. As things are changing, share that with your kids. Or, how come we were doing this now, but now we're not going to do this anymore? Or I thought this. I mean, I think we have to be as open as we can with our kids. And we can tell them what we know. And sometimes what we know is changing. But I think that's huge. And honestly, it goes back to getting creative. I mean, how can we find a way for our kids to have an outlet? How can we find ways to still interact with friends? How can we find ways to still interact with family? Like trying to keep all of the things that were important before in here. And it's not easy. And I feel like it's one of those things that's going to be constantly changing. I mean, so we have a vaccine, and that's great, but it's not gone tomorrow. we really do have to face that possibility, and and trying to hold out hope, because really it's not going to be forever. And that's one of the things that I say to my kids all the time. It's not going to be forever.
Right.
I think about our athletes. We had a fall season. Maybe we will have a winter season. Maybe it's not going to be that we get to complete 95% of the games. I mean, we're losing a chunk of that as we speak. So maybe we don't get 95% of our games, but if we get 60%, is that better than nothing? I mean, trying to look at that and say, you know what, you got to play some of these games.
Right.
Unfortunately, things got pushed back, or maybe even seasons get delayed a little bit more. But is it still better to have something than to not have anything? I mean, look at the positive in it. And I know some days it's going to be harder than others, because, well, we're going to have days where we're more stressed out and we're taking it hard. We all live those days because we're all human. But honestly, I think it's just about doing the best that you can, be honest, and deliver it at a level that your kids can understand it.
Sure.
So,
Dr. Hodges, thank you for your time again. I appreciate you coming on. And as this goes on, I'm sure we're going to talk again and try and find out where kids are. Maybe after the winter, we'll see how things are. As we know, winter's always a tough time of the year for everybody, because it is after the holidays and it is cold and bleak, even under normal years. Now with COVID, I fear what that may bring for all of us.
Hopefully, though, maybe that's going to force us out. And we don't want to be outside in the winter, but you know what? If we don't want to be cooped up in our houses, we get outside, even if that means you take a winter walk. I was floored as I was outside this morning. I was like, wow, how many people are out running? It's 27 degrees. You know what? They needed it. And I'm like, good for you. I couldn't believe it. And so we might have to push ourselves in a little bit of a different way, and that's okay too. So.
All right, Doctor, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Got it, Tony. Thank you.